Good evening. I'm Mike Marza. As we look back at the beginning of what will be a big week in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, the prosecution intends to rest its case tomorrow, and defense attorneys confirming today that Mr. Combs will not take the witness stand. And they also plan to rest without calling any witnesses. In the meantime, the special agent for Homeland Security investigations back on the stand today. And in just a moment, we're going to be joined by ABC News legal contributor Bernarda Villalona to dig deeper into everything that unfolded in court today. But first up with a recap, here's Darla Miles.
What might seem to be a boring, uneventful day of testimony could end up being the most compelling in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. Monday morning, Combs, attorneys for both sides, and jurors all wearing headphones, viewing excerpts of hotel night videos with Jane, while the rest of the courtroom sat silently for nearly 45 minutes. Special Agent Joseph Cerciello returning to the stand, verifying financial and digital records admitted as evidence. Also reviewing multiple hours of videotapes. Prosecutors asking, did you review the videos in this chart? Cerciello answering yes. Generally, what do these videos show? Cerciello answering, they are sexually explicit. Prosecutors then asking, who were you able to recognize in the video? Cerciello answering, I was able to recognize an individual by the name of Cabral, going on to add, Sean Combs. Federal prosecutors rounding out their 7-week-long case with testimony related to the charge of transportation for purposes of prostitution, outlining how Combs could spend anywhere between $900 to $5,000 on male escorts alone. Jurors also hearing a recording of Combs booking an escort with an agency, saying, I'll send info and stop raising my rates. I'm a long timer. Defense attorneys beginning their cross-examination late Monday afternoon, directing attention to some financial records never reviewed by Special Agent Cielo when Combs used his personal bank account to pay for some expenses. Defense attorneys also reading text messages Jane sent to escorts on her own. One reading, I'm free tomorrow. I can fly you out tomorrow, or I can fly you out tonight. The escort named Cabral responding, yes, I am, baby. I'm definitely down. Would love to see you. And another text message exchange reads in part, want to come to Miami tomorrow? I have a small freedom window. Cabral answering, I would really love to see you, but I have a chef gig. Jane then responding, come after your chef gig. Now, closing arguments are expected to take place on Thursday. However, on Wednesday, the day before, prosecutors and defense attorneys are going to come together for a charge conference. They have to decide what the charging instructions will be for the jury, and that might take longer than expected.
Our thanks to Darla Miles, joined now by Bernarda Villalona. So Darla kind of set it up with, it sounds like it was very tedious, very sort of details, this summary witness as it's described. Take me inside court. What was it like in there today?
Yeah, so today was only one witness that was on the stand, and that was a summary witness. And this summary witness in particular was testifying to events having to deal with Jane, not having to deal with Cassie at all. It's all having to deal with Jane. In terms of the testimony itself, direct examination took all of this morning. And again, attorney Comey was going to literally line by line almost of having to deal with text messages, dealing with invoices, dealing with voice notes, dealing with some of these hotel night explicit videos, to the point at one point I was timing it, and it seemed that the jury for over 40 minutes were watching these sex videos, to the point that the witness that was on the stand, like literally, he was the one that was feeling the most uncomfortable, because I think the jurors at this point were literally not just stoic, showing no emotion, not offended by it at all, I think, from dealing with 7 weeks of this testimony. But the witness on the stand was visibly turning red as he was watching these same videos. But that really lasted the entire day. The defense went and they started their cross-examination in the afternoon after lunch, but they literally only had about an hour of cross-examining this witness. And what they focused on, they also put in some video, and it's the same videos that the prosecution put into evidence, but they were focused on other aspects of the video. Particular, I believe the aspects that they were focusing on are probably where Jane was directing the action, directing the sex act, seeming as the most confident and the person that was taking charge inside of the room, to try to show that this wasn't something that she was forced to actually do, but more of that she wanted to engage in. They also did that with text messages as well. So in terms of the prosecution, they put in selective text messages, selected videos, selected video portions, and the defense, they went and attacked it by saying, you never saw this summary witness, right? You weren't shown this. In fact, all the evidence that you testified to was all chosen by who? The prosecution team. They're going to continue going through that same line of questioning tomorrow, and hopefully by tomorrow before lunchtime, they'll be able to finish a cross-examination of this witness.
Now, we heard Darla mention that on Wednesday, we expect this charging conference to happen. Now, explain what that is and how important that is.
Yes. So the charging conference is where all the parties, the prosecution as well as the defense, and with the judge present, they start arguing as to what is the jury charge? What is this jury going to listen as to what is the law? What is their direction? And it's really important because remember, in the end, once the judge gives this jury their instructions, they have to follow the instructions that have been given to them in terms of what is the law, what is the definition of racketeering, what is racketeering conspiracy, what is predicate acts, what are the predicate acts, how you should evaluate these predicate acts, what is sex trafficking, what is transportation to engage in prosecution, how do I evaluate the defendant not testifying, how do I evaluate evidence, what is beyond a reasonable doubt. All of that is encompassed in this jury charge and is what is discussed at the charging conference, because in the end, this jury is going to be left with the evidence that they heard, the testimony that they heard, the exhibits that are in evidence, the summary charts, but more importantly, that jury charge that is given to them.
Well, the jury will not hear from Mr. Combs himself.
That's
and
correct.
The jury will not hear the defense put up a case. What do you make of that decision?
Yes, so the defendant has not officially put on the record that he's not going to testify. I assume that that's going to that will probably happen on Tuesday or even Wednesday morning, where the judge is going to ask Mr. Combs, do you wish to testify on your own defense? And to know that it is your free will, your decision alone to determine whether you want to testify or not. Knowing that, do you wish to testify? Likely Mr. Combs is going to say no, and that's because the defense team has indicated, because of the schedule, we know that they intend to finish either Tuesday or the very latest Wednesday morning. That doesn't give enough time for Mr. Combs to actually testify, so we're inferring from that that he's not going to testify. In terms of why would Mr. Combs not testify? When a defendant testifies, it changes the deliberation proceeding in the sense that the jurors aren't going to be like, did the prosecution prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt? Now it's more of, do I believe what Sean Combs is saying to us? Do I believe when he gives up these excuses, or why Jane or Cassie may have acted this way, or why he spoke to them in this way, or what happened in that Intercontinental Hotel, or the expenses, or the text messages, the explanation that he tries to give to this jury? Or they could be like, well, I don't like how he looked on the stand, or his mannerism when he testified. There's so much that goes into a defendant testifying that majority of the times defendant don't testify at all, because again, you take that out of the decision making of the jury. Now, we expected, of course, Mr. Combs not to testify, but for the defense not to call any witnesses, I think, you know, a jury, while they're instructed in the jury instruction that the burden is on the prosecution and that the defense does not have to put on a case, they may be questioning as to why they're not putting on a case. But again, they can't hold that against them. But at the very least, I had expected that the defense was going to call an expert, a forensic expert, one to contradict what expert Hughes testified to. And I believe that the expert that they had was Dr. Sasha Bardet, which I personally have used in cases, in homicide cases, and actually in other cases as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. And he's excellent on the stand. But they have chosen that they're not going to call him. So it's going to pretty much make closing arguments like, look, they haven't proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And according to the defense, they believe that they don't need to call anyone.
Are you surprised?
I'm surprised that they at least didn't call Dr. Sasha Bardet, the expert, having to deal with forensics, because in the end, you know, you want to try to contradict and you want to try to make it a battle of the experts. It's not saying anything about the strength or weaknesses in your case, but more of, let me take a jab at the prosecution's case by calling this expert.
Just a couple of more, because as we approach deliberations now and this jury, taking the case into their hands, Mr. Combs is facing 5 counts. One
Yes.
dealing with racketeering and criminal enterprise.
Racketeering conspiracy.
And then 2 for Cassie Ventura, the
Yes.
first alleged victim, and then 2 for the woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane.
Yes.
And the jury, when they're deliberating, they are able to, independently of those
Correct.
charges, decide one thing for one
Absolutely.
and another for another.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think in this case, and this is why closing arguments are so important, and it's so important for the prosecutor in her closing argument to give direction to the jury. When I was a prosecutor and I would do closing arguments, I would start off by telling the jury, like, look, when you go into that jury deliberation room, what you should be deciding, give them the questions. What evidence is relevant? Tell them what's relevant, and try to get all the outside noise out of their mind and tell them to focus on these charges, these elements, this evidence, because this is what matters. And that's why it's going to be so key for closing arguments. In terms of the charges here, you have racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, 1 for Jane, 1 for Cassie. Transportation to engage in prostitution, 1 for Jane, 1 for Cassie. I personally, if I were the prosecutor on this case, I would separate the racketeering conspiracy. Of course, separate the counts having to do with Cassie, the counts having to deal with Jane. And I will probably even just start with the racketeering conspiracy. And because with the racketeering conspiracy, you don't really have to fight over, do you believe Jane or do you believe Cassie? Because there's independent evidence to show exactly having to deal with the enterprise. And then having to deal with witnesses that are independent from Cassie and Jane, that being Kid Cudi, when we're talking about the arson, Capricorn Clark, when we're dealing with the kidnapping, and also having to deal with the arson, because remember, Capricorn Clark was the person that was inside of the car when they went over to Kid Cudi's house, and is corroborated by what? The police officer who pulls up and runs the plate, and it belongs to Bad Boy Entertainment or Combs Enterprise, one of those. I will also separate out, you got that other predicate act having to deal with the bribery. Remember, Sean Combs individually gave $100,000 to security guard in order to get that tape from the Intercontinental Hotel. So you have that. And then you have the various witness who puts out having to deal with the drug distribution. Even the last witness, Brendan Paul, who testified that he procured drugs for Sean Combs, and also that at one point that Sean Combs even gave him like a sample of drugs and was like, oh, try it. Guess what? That one little interaction right there, oh, here, try it. Possession with intent to distribute. So you have various witnesses with that. And then, of course, with the transportation to engage in prostitution, that is the easiest charge for this jury to determine, because, hey, were there escorts? Yes. Were they getting paid for their service? Yes. Was there sex? Yes, and all you got to prove is 1 sex act. Did they travel across state lines? Yes, you had escorts from Atlanta, from Los Angeles, going down to Miami, going down to Turks and Caicos. So you have that. Did sex happen? You have that. You have that from the witnesses. You have that from the receipts. You got that from the text messages, from the travel logs. You got that from the hotel. So that is the easiest charge for this jury to actually figure out. And I think, again, the most difficult part is going to be the sex trafficking, because, again, you have these 2 women. While they're separate, they still decided to be in these relationships, and not everyone's going to comprehend that dynamic there, even though they did hear from Dr. Hughes. And then again, if you believe the sex trafficking or even the transportation to engage in prostitution, both of those are predicate acts, so you can add that to the racketeering conspiracy.
So if you are the prosecution going into this moment in the trial, how do you feel?
Well, they did the best that they can, right? They did the best that they can. And with the summary charts, I think they're doing a mini summation, a mini closing argument before the closing arguments to give insight to this jury about these 2 women. They did that with 2 summary witnesses. So they've been able to lay it out. But now you got to land this plane in the sense of closing arguments. You're going to have to tell this jury, I've laid everything out for you. Now I'm going to show you how to analyze this and how the evidence that I put forth in front of you meets out these charges. That's why closing arguments is so crucial, especially in a case like this.
And if you're the defense?
With the defense, you're going to have to go out there swinging. And swinging in the sense of, of course, ram into the throats of these jurors that, look, they haven't proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense does not have a burden in this case. I didn't have to even question these witnesses, but I did. So now let's deal with the main evidence here. Yes, we've said about sex happened. It happened. It is personal. I'm not asking you to like or love or to sit down and have dinner or to go out on a trip or anything with Sean Combs. I'm asking you to evaluate the evidence here. These were consensual relationships between adult women that stayed in these relationships because they love Sean Combs. They love the life that he gave and provided to these women and continue to provide for these women. So consent was never an issue when it came into these romantic relationships. And of course, back away that this was anything having to deal with an enterprise, and also be like, wait, Sean Combs, that's the only defendant that's here. So who was he co-conspirator with? You heard about KK, you didn't see KK. You heard about security guards, guess what? I don't see them at this table. So that's what they need to point out to this jury, the defense, to try to plant seeds of doubt. That's it, seeds of doubt. You don't know which one is going to land with any given juror, so you put it all out there and see what actually sticks.
There's a lot to wade through for this
It's
jury.
a lot. It's going to be a long closing argument.
Okay, we'll see how it plays out. Another big day tomorrow. Bernarda, always great to get your perspective.
Thank you, Mike.
Stay with Eyewitness News and ABC7NY for all the new updates. We have a real-time blog as well, where you can follow the details coming right out of court.